I was sleeping under an overpass, curled around my last trash bag of clothes, when a stranger tucked a clean blanket around my shoulders. He whispered that they stole my life and asked if I was ready to steal it back. I woke up with frost on my hair and a key card in my pocket. I used to hand out blankets here for $16 an hour. Now, I was about to make sure nobody else would ever sleep under this bridge alone. My name is Ivy Sanders, and if you had asked me 6 months ago what rock bottom looked like, I would have told you it was a missed mortgage payment or a broken transmission. I would have been wrong. Rock bottom is not a grand event. It is the smell of wet concrete and diesel exhaust. It is the vibration of 18-wheelers rumbling 20 feet above your head, shaking dust into your hair while you try to curl into a ball tight enough to preserve your own body heat. I was 32 years old. I had a master's degree in social work and a student loan balance that would take 40 years to pay off. I had an employee ID card from the Harbor Light Outreach Network tucked into the bottom of a black trash bag that held every single thing I owned, and I was currently freezing to death under the Interstate 5 overpass in Harbor Falls, Oregon. The irony was not lost on me. I used to be the one with the clipboard, walking these same encampments, counting heads, handing out resource pamphlets and pairs of dry socks. I was the case manager. I was the person you called when the system failed. Now, I was the failure. Earlier that afternoon, I had stood near the Chevron station on 4th Street. It was a humiliation I still had not mastered. You have to stand just close enough to the pump to be seen, but far enough away that the attendant does not call the cops. It is a delicate geography of shame. I held a cardboard sign that just said "hungry," because I could not bring myself to write "please." A silver sedan pulled up to pump number 6. The driver was a woman I recognized instantly. Her name was Brenda. 2 years ago, I had spent 3 weeks fighting with the housing authority to get her and her 2 kids into a Section 8 apartment. I had filled out the forms. I had made the calls. I had held her hand when she cried in my office. When she got out of the car, our eyes locked. I saw the recognition hit her face, followed immediately by a mask of disgust. "Ivy?" she asked, the nozzle of the gas pump clicking in her hand. I lowered the sign, my face burning hot despite the November chill. "Hi, Brenda. I hope the apartment is working out." She did not smile. She did not reach into her purse. She stepped back, putting the car door between us like a shield. "I heard about what happened, on the news." "The news got it wrong, Brenda," I said, my voice cracking. I had not spoken out loud in 2 days. "They said you stole," she muttered, looking around to see if anyone else was watching. "They said you took money meant for the shelter, for the heating bill." "I didn't," I pleaded, hate rising in my throat. "I didn't take a dime." "You deserve to get fired," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Stealing from us, from people with nothing that is sick. Ivy, you belong out here." She got back in her car and drove away without pumping a single gallon of gas. I stood there as the exhaust faded, clutching my sign, feeling the truth settle in my gut like lead. In Harbor Falls, I was not just homeless, I was a pariah. The memory of that afternoon burned in my mind as I lay under the bridge, trying to find a soft spot on the gravel. It triggered the other memory, the one that played on a loop every time I closed my eyes. The day my life ended. It was vivid, shot in high definition in my brain. The boardroom of Harbor Light was on the top floor of the Harbor Falls Network Tower. It smelled of lemon polish and money. I remembered the way the air conditioning hummed, so different from the stifling heat of the intake lobby downstairs where the actual clients waited. Preston Cole, the CEO, stood at the head of the mahogany table. He was a man who wore $3,000 suits to meetings about poverty. He looked sad, theatrically, professionally sad. He held a manila file folder between 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "We trusted you, Ivy," Preston said. He dropped the file on the table. It made a heavy final thud. "The audit is clear. $10,000 diverted from the emergency fund. Transfers authorized by your login. The timestamps match your shifts." "That is impossible," I had said, standing up. My hands were shaking. I don't have authorization for vendor transfers. I only approve intake supplies. You know that. My login doesn't even have those permissions. Lorraine Mercer, the board chair, sat to his right. She did not look sad. She looked bored. She was checking her watch, a gold timepiece that cost more than my parents' house. We have the logs, Ms. Sanders, Lorraine said, her voice like ice cracking. We cannot have thieves representing the mission. Think of the donors. Think of the reputation of this charity. I didn't do it, I shouted. Check the IP addresses. Check the security, Preston said, nodding to the door. 2 guards I had greeted every morning for 5 years stepped forward. They did not look at me. They took my arms. I was escorted past my own desk, past the photos of my niece, past the framed Caseworker of the Year certificate. They walked me out the front door and tossed my purse onto the sidewalk. If you speak to the press, Preston had said, leaning close before the glass doors slid shut, we will press criminal charges. We are being generous by only firing you. Go away, Ivy. And I did. I went away. I went all the way down, back under the bridge. A semi-truck roared overhead, shaking me out of the past. It was the deepest part of the night now, 3 or 4 in the morning, the witching hour. The air was so cold it felt solid, pressing against my skin through the layers of cheap fabric. I was wrapped in a blanket I had scavenged from the dumpster behind the shelter 3 weeks ago. It was gray, coarse, and smelled faintly of industrial bleach and mildew. It was the smell of the institution that had chewed me up and spit me out. Around me, the dark shapes of other sleepers were motionless lumps in the gloom. We were a graveyard of the living. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening to the wind whistle through the concrete pillars. My stomach cramped with hunger, a dull, constant ache that I had learned to live with. I tucked my chin into my chest, trying to preserve the small pocket of warmth created by my own breath. Then I heard it. Crunch, 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 footsteps on the gravel, slow, deliberate. My heart hammered against my ribs. Under the bridge, footsteps at night never meant anything good. It was either the police coming to sweep the camp, telling us to move along to nowhere, or it was drunk teenagers looking for someone vulnerable to torment. I stopped breathing. I went limp, feigning deep sleep. The footsteps stopped right beside me. I could feel a presence looming over me, blocking the faint orange glow of the streetlights from the highway above. Every muscle in my body tensed, ready to spring, ready to run, ready to fight for the trash bag that held my life. But there was no shout. There was no kick. Instead, I felt a weight settle over me. It was soft, heavy, warm, a blanket, a real one. I could feel the density of it, thick wool that blocked out the biting wind instantly. It was tucked gently around my shoulders, a tender gesture that felt so out of place in this violent, frozen world that it terrified me more than a blow would have. A hand, gloved in leather, rested briefly on my shoulder. It was firm but not aggressive. A man's voice, low and raspy like gravel tumbling in a dryer, whispered right into my ear. They hung the theft on you because you wouldn't help them cook the books. My eyes flew open, but all I saw was the dark weave of the wool covering my face. I jolted, gasping, but the hand pressed down gently, keeping me grounded. Stay down, the voice commanded. It was not a threat. It was an instruction. You want your life back. Ivy, look in your coat pocket when you wake up, and do not throw it away this time. The hand lifted. The warmth remained. Who are you? I tried to whisper, but my throat was too dry. He did not answer. I heard the crunch of boots walking away, calm and steady. No running, no hurry. I waited 5 seconds, 10 seconds, my heart sounding like a drum in my ears. Then I heard the heavy thud of a car door closing, the sound expensive and solid. I peeled the wool back just enough to peek out with one eye. Down the service road. Red taillights flared in the darkness. A black sedan, sleek and low, slipped onto the empty highway and vanished into the night. I lay there for hours, terrified to move, terrified to sleep. The new blanket was incredibly warm. It smelled of cedar and old paper, a scent of libraries and money. It was the best thing I had touched in 6 months. Eventually, exhaustion won the war against adrenaline, and I drifted into a restless, jagged sleep. When I woke up, the world was white, frost-coated everything. It glittered on the chain-link fences and crunched on the gravel. My breath puffed out in white clouds. For a second, I thought I had hallucinated the entire encounter. It was a common side effect of sleep deprivation and hunger. The mind invents kindness because the reality is too stark to bear. But then I looked down. I was not covered in my bleach-stained rag. I was wrapped in a thick, navy blue wool blanket with satin trim. It was dry. It was clean. It was real. I sat up, shivering as the cold air hit my face. The memory of the whisper came rushing back. "Look in your coat pocket." My hands were stiff with cold. Clumsy as I patted down the pocket of my dirty parka, I felt something hard and plastic. I pulled it out. It was a white access card, plain except for a magnetic strip and black laser-printed text. HFN Archive. Sub-basement authorized. Sanders. My thumb brushed over my name. It looked official. It looked new. There was something else in the pocket, a small piece of cream-colored stationery, folded into a sharp square. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was neat, slanted, and old-fashioned, written in black ink. Clause 14.3. Whistle proxy. You have already done the first 6 months. V.H. I stared at the note. Clause 14.3. The words meant nothing to me, but the initials. V.H. What you got there? Ivy. I jumped, shoving the card and note back into my pocket. Miguel was standing over me, holding his hands out to the fire burning in a rusted oil drum 10 feet away. Miguel had been on the streets for 10 years. He was the unofficial mayor of the underpass. He saw everything. I scrambled up, wrapping the expensive wool blanket around my shoulders like a cape. I walked over to the fire, needing the heat, needing to make sure I was actually awake. "Someone came last night," I said, my voice raspy. "Did you see him?" Miguel nodded slowly, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. "I saw a car, big black Lincoln, or maybe a Cadillac, old school, stopped right by you. Driver got out, left you that." He nodded at the blanket. "He left me this too," I said, lowering my voice. I pulled the card out just enough for Miguel to see the letters HFN. Miguel's eyes went wide. He stepped back, as if the plastic card was radioactive. "HFN," he muttered. "Harbor Falls Network. Do you know what the sub-basement is?" I asked. Miguel looked at me, then at the card, then at the blanket. He let out a low whistle. "There ain't no sub-basement on the directory, Ivy, but the old-timers talk about it. They say only one person goes down there." "Who?" "The founder," Miguel whispered, looking over his shoulder as if the bridge itself were listening. "Victor Hale, the guy who built this whole city's charity system, the guy who disappeared the same week they kicked you out." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. V.H. Victor Hale, the man who built the empire that ruined me, the man who was supposed to be a recluse, a ghost, a myth. I looked at the note again. "You have already done the first 6 months." He had been watching, while I froze, while I begged, while I lost my dignity piece by piece. He had been watching me fall, measuring the depth of the drop. The anger hit me first, hot and sharp, but then, underneath it, something else sparked. A feeling I thought I had lost back in the boardroom when Preston Cole dropped that file. Hope, and something sharper than hope. I looked at the key card. It was not just a piece of plastic. It was a weapon. "They stole your life, Ivy," I whispered to myself, repeating the stranger's words. I gripped the card in my fist until the edges bit into my palm. I was done sleeping. It was time to wake up. The lobby of the Harbor Falls Network Tower was a cathedral of glass and polished marble that smelled aggressively of expensive espresso and sanitized ambition. I had walked through these revolving doors 1,000 times before, back then. I walked with the brisk, coffee-fueled stride of a woman who had emails to answer and a pension plan. Now, I moved like a ghost haunting her own life. It was 8:45 in the morning. The rush hour crush was my cover. I was wearing the navy wool blanket Victor Hale had given me, draped over my head like a shawl to hide my matted hair. Underneath, I wore my old gray Harbor Light hoodie, the one with the bleach stain on the cuff. I kept my head down, weaving through the phalanx of suits and briefcases. To them, I was invisible. I was just a pile of rags that had drifted in from the street, a visual glitch in their perfect morning. If I moved fast enough, their eyes would slide right off me. I did not go to the main elevator bank. I knew the security guards at the desk. Frank and Jerome. They were good men who used to ask about my niece. If they saw me now, the shame would kill me before hunger did. Instead, I slipped down a narrow corridor behind the large fern planters, heading toward the service bay. There was a freight elevator there, usually reserved for catering carts and maintenance crews. I had never used it, but I had seen the janitorial staff waiting there. The hallway was empty. I stood before the brushed steel panel, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled the white access card from my pocket. My hand was trembling so badly I almost dropped it. If this did not work, the silent alarm would trip. Frank and Jerome would come around the corner. They would not see Ivy the caseworker. They would see Ivy the trespasser, Ivy the thief. I pressed the card against the black reader. Beep. A small light on the panel snapped from angry red to a solid, welcoming green. The heavy steel doors slid open with a smooth, oiled hush. I stepped inside. The interior was lined with protective padding. There were no floor buttons, just a single card reader. I scanned the card again. The elevator did not go up. It dropped. It was a sensation of weightlessness that turned my stomach. We passed the lobby. We passed the parking garage levels. I watched the digital display on the panel, but it was blank. We were going deep, deeper than the building plans I had ever seen. The air pressure changed, popping in my ears. When the doors finally opened, the air that hit me was cool, dry, and smelled of ozone and dust. It was the smell of old servers and forgotten secrets. I stepped out into a corridor that looked nothing like the plush offices above. The floor was bare concrete. The lights were long fluorescent tubes that hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz. I walked down the hallway, the sound of my worn sneakers scuffing the cement echoing too loudly in the silence. Halfway down the hall, a black dome security camera hung from the ceiling. As I approached, the lens whirred. I froze, pulling the blanket tighter, waiting for a voice to boom over an intercom. The camera lens swiveled. It did not zoom in on me. It tilted up and to the left, pointing deliberately at the blank wall, turning its back on me. Victor Hale. He was clearing the path. The realization made the hair on my arms stand up. I was walking into the belly of the beast, and the beast was holding the door open. At the end of the corridor stood a heavy, reinforced steel door. There was no handle, just a keypad and a card slot. A sign in red letters read, "Archive authorized access only." I swiped the card. Access denied. A red light flashed. My breath hitched. I swiped again. Access denied. I felt a surge of panic. Was this a game? A cruel joke to get me away from the bridge so they could arrest me for trespassing. I looked at the card in my hand, flipping it over. The plastic sleeve felt slightly uneven. I dug my fingernail into the seam of the card holder. Something hard slid out. It was a small, flat metal key, silver and unassuming. I looked at the door again and saw a tiny, almost invisible keyhole beneath the card scanner. I slid the key in. It turned with a heavy, expensive click, the sound of tumblers falling into place. I pushed the door. It swung inward on silent hinges. I stepped inside and the motion sensor lights flickered on, row by row, illuminating the room. It was not a closet. It was a library of the damned. The room was climate-controlled, freezing cold. Rows of gray rolling shelves stretched back into the shadows. Floor-to-ceiling banker boxes were stacked with military precision. In the center of the room sat a heavy mid-century metal desk, completely bare except for a banker's lamp and a single thick red binder. I walked to the desk, my legs feeling like they were made of water. I sat down in the leather chair. It groaned under my weight. The red binder was labeled in gold foil, HFN Governance, Principles and Special Clauses. Stuck to the front cover was a yellow post-it note. The handwriting was the same as the note I had received under the bridge. Start at 14.3. Take your time. V. I opened the binder. The pages were thick. Creamy bond paper. I turned past the bylaws, past the mission statements, past the standard operating procedures. I found Clause 14.3, Clause 14.3, the whistle proxy. I read the legal text, my lips moving silently as I parsed the dense legalese. In the event of systemic corruption or ethical breach by the board of directors, the founder reserves the right to temporarily transfer his full voting proxy and oversight authority to a designated former employee who meets the following criteria. 1. The individual must have been terminated for cause related to financial misconduct, which they disputed on record. 2. The individual must have remained unaffiliated with the Harbor Falls Network or any subsidiary for a period of no less than 6 continuous months. 3. The individual must demonstrate independent survival and support without the aid of foundation funds or associated charities during said period. I stopped reading. The room seemed to tilt. 6 months. I had been on the street for exactly 6 months and 4 days. Independent survival. That was what they called it. I called it eating half-eaten burgers out of trash cans. I called it washing my hair in the gas station's sink until the manager chased me out. I called it sleeping with one eye open so nobody stole my shoes. The law did not care about my suffering. It cared about my independence. By cutting me off, by blacklisting me so I could not get a job at any other agency, by forcing me to live on the absolute edge of existence. Lorraine and Preston had accidentally perfected me. They had turned me into the key that could unlock their destruction. My homelessness was not a tragedy to this binder. It was a legal trigger. I turned the page. There was a subclause. Upon activation, the proxy shall have full access to all historical records, financial audits, and internal communications. I looked up at the rows of boxes. Take your time, the note had said. I stood up and walked to the nearest shelf. The boxes were labeled by year and department. I found a section marked Harbor Light, Operations. I pulled down a box labeled with the current year and hauled it to the desk. I started digging. At first, it was just numbers, spreadsheets of donor intakes and capital allocations. But then I found the project files. Project code Winter Warmth Alpha. This was the project I had pitched 2 years ago. It was my baby. I had asked for $50,000 to winterize the underpass, to install heated windbreaks and solar-powered lighting for the people who refused to come into the shelter. The board had rejected it, telling me the funds were tight. But here, in the internal ledger, the project was listed as active and fully funded. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. There were invoices, massive ones. November 10th. $45,000 paid to Apex Construction for structural windbreaks. December 2nd. $22,000 paid to City Light Solutions for solar grid installation. January 15th. $12,000 paid to Safety. First supply for thermal blankets and sleeping pods. I stared at the dates. I stared at the amounts. I lived under that bridge. There were no windbreaks. There were no solar lights. The only heat came from the fires we built in trash cans. Illegal fires that the police kicked over every other night. I pulled another file. This one was marked Donor Reports, Q4. It was a glossy draft of the report sent to the major donors. There were photos, beautiful, high-resolution photos of the bridge, but they were photoshopped. I could see the blur where they had added clean, warm-looking pods. The text below the photo read, "Thanks to your generosity, the 4th Street overpass is now a safe haven, fully equipped with our proprietary warming technology." They had raised hundreds of thousands of dollars on a lie, and the lie was the very place where I was freezing to death. I shoved the folder aside and dug deeper. I needed to know why me. Why had they chosen me to burn? I found a manila envelope at the bottom of the box marked Personnel. Containment Strategy. I opened it. Inside was a memo dated 3 weeks before my firing. To L. Mercer, Board Chair. From Peaky Cole, CEO. Subject Variance Explanations and Personnel Asset Lorraine. The audit gap for the bridge initiative is growing too large to hide in the general ledger. We need a specific event to explain the shortfall before the end of the fiscal year. I recommend we consolidate the missing funds into a theft narrative. Ivy Sanders is the ideal candidate. She has high-level access, but low-level political protection. She is passionate and often bypasses protocol to help clients, which makes the narrative of misguided misappropriation believable. If we terminate her publicly for theft, we can claim the missing bridge funds were stolen by a rogue employee. This closes the audit loop and explains why the upgrades were never built. I felt bile rise in my throat. It was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. I was a line item. I was a containment strategy. I pulled out the next document. It was the security log from the day of my alleged theft. They had shown the police grainy photos of me handing envelopes to clients in the parking lot. They said it was cash I had taken from the safe. I found the original incident report in the box. Stapled to it were the receipts for those envelopes. Item 10 ride bus pass. Quantity 50. Item grocery gift card. $20. Quantity 20. I had bought them with my own Christmas bonus. I was handing out bus passes so people could get to job interviews. But the next page showed a wire transfer authorized at the exact same time I was in the parking lot. $10,000, wired from the shelter's operating account to a vendor called Mercer Logistics LLC. Mercer, Lorraine Mercer. She had wired the money to herself while I was outside handing out bus tickets. And then she had used the footage of me to explain where the money went. I sat back, the cold from the concrete floor seeping through my jeans, through the wool blanket, into my bones. I thought about Miguel. I thought about the woman with the hacking cough who slept 3 spots down from me. I thought about the boy, no older than 19, who had frozen to death last month during the cold snap. They died because the money for their heat was sitting in Lorraine Mercer's bank account, and they blamed me. The people under the bridge spat when they heard my name because they thought I was the reason they were cold. The silence of the archive pressed in on me. I looked at the red binder. I looked at the stack of evidence that proved I was innocent. Yes, but it proved something much worse. It proved that the entire system was a machine designed to eat the poor and feed the rich. And for the last 6 months, I had been sleeping inside the machine's stomach. I closed the folder. My hands were not shaking anymore. I reached into my pocket and touched the keycard. The fear that had driven me down here was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I was not just a homeless woman anymore. I was the proxy, and I was going to burn their house down with their own paper. The elevator ride back up felt longer than the descent. When the doors slid open in the service bay, I pulled my hood up and walked fast, keeping my head down until I hit the cold air of the street. The sunlight was harsh, gray and unforgiving, stripping away the eerie magic of the archive and leaving me back in the reality where I was just a dirty woman with a stolen blanket. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a miracle it still had charge. I charged it in 15-minute increments at the public library before the security guards noticed me. I pulled it out. The screen was cracked, held together by tape. The number was blocked. Hello? My voice sounded thin in the wind. The Galaxy Diner, 4th and Main, back booth, the gravelly voice said. It was him, the man from the bridge. You have 20 minutes. The line went dead. The Galaxy Diner was a 24-hour grease trap near the bus station, the kind of place where the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the waitress looked like she had seen everything twice. I walked the 6 blocks, clutching the blanket tight. When I pushed through the glass door, the warmth hit me like a physical blow. Smelling of bacon fat and sanitizer, I saw him immediately. Victor Hale did not look like the oil painting that hung in the HFN lobby. In the painting, he was robust, rosy-cheeked, the benevolent grandfather of charity. The man in the booth was a hawk. He was thinner, wearing a charcoal sweater that looked expensive but old. His hair was white and wild, not the neatly trimmed silver of the portrait, but his eyes were the same. They were dark, sharp, and terrifyingly intelligent. He was watching the door, and the moment I stepped in, he locked onto me. I walked to the booth, acutely aware of the squeak of my wet sneakers on the linoleum. I slid into the vinyl seat opposite him. I kept the blanket wrapped around me. It was my armor. "You look terrible," Victor said. He did not say it with pity. He said it like he was reading a thermometer. "I live under a bridge, Mr. Hale," I replied, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. "It is not exactly a spa treatment." "Good," he said. "Anger is useful. Self-pity is not." He signaled the waitress without looking at her. She dropped 2 mugs of black coffee on the table and retreated. Victor slid a thin stack of papers across the formica table. "Read," he commanded. I looked down. The top document was titled, Proxy Activation Agreement. Beneath it was a timeline of my employment at Harbor Light, marking every promotion, every review, and finally, the date of my termination. Beside that date, he had written in red ink the trigger event. I flipped to the next page. It was a copy of Clause 14.3, the same text I had just read in the sub-basement, but specific sections were highlighted in yellow. "You wrote this," I said, looking up at him. "The whistle proxy. You wrote it into the bylaws years ago. I built this foundation to help people." "Ivy," Victor said, wrapping his long fingers around his mug. "But I know human nature. I knew that eventually, the people I hired to run it would start loving the money more than the mission. Power rots people. I needed a fail-safe, a kill switch. And I am the switch," I said. It was not a question. "You are the weapon," he corrected, "but a weapon is useless if it breaks when you fire it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to that low rumble I had heard in the dark. "I knew what they were doing. Ivy, I saw the invoices for the bridge upgrades 2 years ago. I knew they were fake. I stepped down from the board to let them think they were safe. I watched them get greedy. I watched them look for a scapegoat." My stomach twisted. You knew they were going to frame me." "I knew they needed someone clean," Victor said. "Someone who actually did the work. Someone who refused to sign off on the garbage numbers. That was you. You were the obstacle, so you became the target." I felt the heat rise in my face, hotter than the diner air. "You could have stopped it. You could have walked into that boardroom 6 months ago and fired them. If I had fired them then, they would have settled quietly," Victor said, his eyes cold and logical. "They would have paid a fine, kept their bonuses, and found another charity to bleed dry, to kill a cancer like Lorraine Mercer and Preston Cole. You have to let it grow until it is big enough to see. I had to let them commit the crime fully, and I had to see if you would survive the fall." I stared at him, horror dawning on me. "You watched me," I whispered. "You watched them fire me. You watched security throw me out." "I watched you lose your apartment," Victor said, ticking the items off on his fingers. "I watched your car get repossessed. I watched you spend your first night in the park. I watched you move to the bridge." "Why?" I choked out. "Why would you let that happen?" "Because the proxy clause requires it," he said simply. "Clause 14.3 is specific. You have to be completely severed from the system. You have to be independent. If I had helped you, if I had given you $500 for rent, you would have been compromised. You would just be a disgruntled employee taking a payoff. To hold my vote, you had to be a ghost. I needed to know if you had the steel to survive the winter." He paused, looking at the blanket I was clutching. "I watched you give your own coat to a pregnant girl 3 months ago," he said softly. "That was when I knew. You were not just a victim. You were a leader who had lost her army." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to throw the scalding coffee in his face. He had treated my life like a science experiment. He had let me starve to test his legal theory. "I hated you last night," I said, my voice trembling. "When you put the blanket on me, I thought you were an angel, But you are just as bad as them. You used me. Yes, Victor said. He did not flinch. I used you, and now I'm offering you the chance to use me. Do you want to be angry, Ivy, or do you want to be effective? He tapped the paper. This agreement transfers my founder's vote to you, all of it, for all matters regarding governance, finance, and the harbor light shelter. My vote outweighs the entire board combined. If you sign this, you walk into the next quarterly meeting not as a beggar, but as the boss. I looked at the paper. It was a dizzying amount of power. It was the power to fire Preston, the power to audit Lorraine, the power to open the warehouse doors and give everyone under that bridge a bed. Give me the pen, I said, reaching out. Victor pulled the paper back. Conditions, he said sharply. There are conditions. The clause is strict. What conditions? You are 6 months and 4 days into your exile. Victor said. The clause requires a full 7 months of independence to be unassailable in court. If we move too soon, their lawyers will argue you were still in a cooling-off period. They will say I bribed you. He looked me dead in the eye. You have to stay out there, Ivy, for 30 more days. The diner went silent around me. The smell of bacon suddenly made me nauseous. You want me to go back under the bridge? I asked, my voice barely audible. Knowing I have this, knowing I could stop it. If you take a single dollar from me, from HFN, or from any associated entity before the 30 days are up, the proxy is void. Victor said, you cannot stay in a hotel I pay for. You cannot eat food I buy. You have to finish the sentence. I might freeze, I said. It is November. Victor, it is getting colder. You have the blanket, he said, glancing at the wool around my shoulders. And you have a job to do. You need to build the case. I can give you access, but I cannot build the evidence wall. You need to document everything. The fake invoices, the missing inventory, the testimony of the people on the street. He slid a small white business card across the table. You cannot do it alone. You need someone who knows where the bodies are buried but isn't on the payroll. This is Dana Crowley. She is an investigative paralegal. She works out of an office above a bail bond shop. She hates Lorraine Mercer almost as much as you do. She will help you, but you have to pay her with your own resources or convince her to work on contingency. I cannot fund her. I looked at the card. Dana Crowley. Compliance strategy. 30 days, I repeated. It felt like a prison sentence. 30 days, Victor confirmed. And then we walk into the boardroom, and you take their heads off. I looked out the window. Across the street, a bus was pulling away, heading toward the shelter district. I knew who was on that bus. Men with frostbite on their toes. Women holding their belongings in plastic bags. People I used to help. People who had spat on me yesterday. I don't want to destroy anyone, I said softly. I just want my name back. I just want to stop shivering. Victor leaned back, crossing his arms. Justice is structural. Ivy, you think this is about your reputation? It is about the machinery. They turned the shelter into a bank account for their renovations. Fixing the shelter will feel like revenge to the ones who sold your blanket, but it is not revenge. It is correction. He pushed the pen toward me. It was a cheap blue ballpoint with the diner's logo on it. Sign it, and you are the proxy. Refuse, and I walk away. You can go back to the bridge and wait for spring, but I think we both know you are not going to do that. I looked at the pen. I looked at my hands, chapped and raw from the cold. I thought about Brenda at the gas station, looking at me like I was trash. I thought about the heat in the boardroom. I thought about the sub-basement archive, silent and cold, holding the truth in a red binder. Every survival instinct in my body was screaming at me to beg him for money, to ask for a motel room, to ask for a hot meal. But then I remembered the whisper, "They stole your life." I picked up the pen. My grip was tight. "I will do it," I said. "But when this is over, when I have the vote, the first thing I am doing is changing the locks on your tower." Victor smiled. It was a thin, terrifying smile. "I am counting on it." I signed my name on the line. Ivy Sanders. The ink was blue and permanent. Victor took the paper and slid it into a leather folder. He stood up, buttoning his coat. "Keep the key card," he said. "Use the archive at night. Meet Dana. Build the wall. I will see you in 30 days. Ivy." He dropped a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. "That is for the waitress," he warned, catching my eye. "Do not touch it. If you use that money to buy a sandwich, you void the contract. You are still on your own." He turned and walked out of the diner, the bell chiming cheerfully behind him. I sat there for a long time, staring at the $20 bill. It was enough for 5 meals. It was enough for a pair of warm gloves. It was right there. I stood up, pulling the wool blanket tight around me. I looked at the waitress, who was watching me suspiciously from the counter. "The money is yours," I told her. I walked out into the cold, the wind biting at my face. I was hungry. I was tired. I was going back to a patch of concrete under a highway. But for the first time in 6 months, I was not just surviving, I was hunting. The address Victor Hale gave me led to a peeling brick building above a bail bonds shop on 2nd Street. The neon sign downstairs buzzed with a dying mosquito sound, flickering pink against the gray pavement. I walked up the narrow staircase, clutching my trash bag of documents like it was the nuclear codes. Dana Crowley's office was smaller than a prison cell and smelled intensely of peppermint tea and old toner. Dana herself was a storm contained in a cheap blazer. She was short, sharp-edged, with glasses perched on the end of her nose and hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. When I placed the copy of Clause 14.3 on her desk, she did not say hello. She picked it up, adjusted her glasses, and read it in silence. Her eyes widened. She looked up at me, then back at the paper, then at me again. "I thought this was a myth," she said, her voice raspy and dry. "Like the Loch Ness Monster or an honest politician. We used to joke about the whistle proxy in paralegal school, the Hale failsafe." "It is real," I said, shivering slightly in the heated room. "And I have 30 days to make it stick." Dana grinned. It was a wolf's grin. "Lock the door, Ivy. We are going to need more coffee." By noon, Dana had transformed the only blank wall in her office into a crime scene map. She used masking tape to divide the plaster into zones and attacked it with color-coded markers. "Blue is for financial diversions," she explained, uncapping a marker with her teeth. "Red is for donor deception, green is for human testimony, and yellow is for the bridge events, the services they promised but never delivered." We started with the paper trail I had stolen from the sub-basement. My termination paperwork was a masterpiece of fiction. It listed multiple verbal warnings for conduct that never happened, but the real gold was in the payroll discrepancies. "Look at this," Dana said, tapping a spreadsheet. "They have you listed as a level 4 administrator in the payroll system starting 3 months before you were fired. Did you get a raise?" "No," I said. "I was making $16 an hour until the day I left." "Level 4 clearance allows for vendor overrides," Dana muttered, drawing a thick blue line from my name to a box she labeled the setup. "They promoted your digital ghost so they could use your ID to move the money." The next morning, I had to do something that terrified me. I had to walk into a bank. The Harbor Falls Community Bank was where I had kept my checking account since I was 22. It was also where Harbor Light did their primary banking. I walked in wearing my cleanest thrift store outfit, a pair of black slacks and a sweater that only had one small hole near the hem. I still had frost in my hair from sleeping outside the night before. The teller, a woman named Sarah who used to cash my paychecks, hesitated when she saw me. She smelled the wood smoke on my coat. I saw her nose wrinkle. "I need the statements for all accounts in my name for the last 6 years, I said, keeping my voice flat and professional, "including any sub-accounts linked to my social security number. There is a fee for printing." "Ivy," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. $10. I placed a crumpled $10 bill on the counter. It was half of the money Victor had left for the waitress, which I had not touched. This $10 came from 3 hours of collecting aluminum cans yesterday afternoon. She printed the stack, I took it to a corner table and started reading. My checking account was there, sad and empty. My savings account, closed with a zero balance. But there was a third account ending in 442, designated donor bonus, I, Sanders. It had been opened 2 years ago. I traced the lines with my finger. $50,000 deposited, $50,000 transferred out, $20,000 in, $20,000 out. The deposits came from General Operating Fund. The withdrawals went to 3 vendors, Mercer Logistics, PC Consulting, and Bridge Solutions, Inc. I never opened this, I whispered. I looked at the signature card on the digital printout. It was my signature, but the loop on the Y was wrong. It was a trace, a forgery. They had used a fake account in my name to wash the money for the renovations they never built. If anyone looked, it would look like I took the money and paid these companies myself. I brought the statements back to Dana. She pinned them to the blue section of the wall. Bridge Solutions, Inc., she read. Let me guess. It is a shell company. We need to prove they never did the work, I said. The paper says they built windbreaks. We need to prove the windbreaks do not exist. That night, I went back to the underpass. It was snowing lightly, wet flakes that turned to slush on the pavement. Miguel was sitting by the fire barrel, warming his hands. I need your help. Miguel, I said. I pulled out my cracked phone. I need you to tell me about the blankets, the day the photographers came. Miguel spat into the fire. The warmth drive, he said bitterly. Last November, a van pulled up, 4 people in bright orange vests. They had a camera that looked like a cannon. They handed me a thick wool blanket, brand new, still had the tag on it. And then, I prompted, hitting record. The guy took 20 pictures, Miguel said, looking directly into the lens. He told me to smile. He told me to look grateful. As soon as he got the shot, the lady in the vest came over and took the blanket back. She said they had to take them to be sanitized before distribution. They put them back in the van and drove off. I slept in a wet cardboard box that night. We spent the next 3 nights filming. I moved through the encampment like a ghost, gathering stories. I found a woman named Carla who told me about the heated pods. They set one up, she told the camera, her face shadowed by her hoodie. Right over there by Pillar 4. It looked like a spaceship, shiny silver. They took pictures of it all morning. Then a tow truck came at 2 in the afternoon and hauled it away. They said it was a prototype. That was 3 years ago. The green section of Dana's wall began to fill up with faces. But we needed someone from the inside. I tracked down Jasmine, a former volunteer who had quit Harbor Light 2 months after I was fired. She was working as a barista at a coffee shop downtown. When I walked in, she almost dropped a pitcher of milk. Ivy, she gasped. Oh my God, I heard bad things. I am still here, Jasmine, I said. I need the group chats. Jasmine paled. I signed an NDA when I left. An NDA covers trade secrets, I said, channeling Dana. It does not cover fraud. If you do not help me, and this blows up, that NDA is going to be the leash that drags you down with them. She met me in the alley behind the shop on her break. She scrolled through her old phone, finding a thread titled Inner Circle. She sent the screenshots to my phone. Date November 12th. User Operations Manager. Message board is coming for a site visit. Make sure the residents look presentable. Grab the props from storage. We need the happy pour, not the scary pour. Date January 4th. User Finance Assistant. Message. Just coded the Sanders variants. LOL. Someone is getting a lump of coal this year. User Lorraine M. Message focus. Team. The narrative has to hold. Ivy is the leak. We are the patch. The patch, I read aloud. They called me the leak. Dana pinned the screenshots to the red section of the wall. We have the money trail, Dana said, stepping back to admire the chaos. We have the victim testimony. We have the intent. Now we need the nail in the coffin. We need to link the fake vendors to Lorraine and Preston personally. Enter Kayla. Kayla was a freelance data analyst Dana knew from a previous class action lawsuit. She worked out of her basement, surrounded by 3 monitors and a haze of vape smoke. She had blue hair and a vendetta against authority figures. Bridge Solutions, Inc., Kayla said, her fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard that sounded like gunfire. Registered agent is a lawyer in Delaware. Boring, but let's look at the metadata on their website. She hit enter. Website registered to an email address. private gmail.com. Preston, I breathed. And look at this, Kayla said, pulling up a satellite map on the main screen. I cross-referenced the invoices from Mercer Logistics. They billed Harbor Light for $40,000 of structural lumber on June 4th. She zoomed in on a property on the edge of the city, a sprawling lake house with a long dock. On June 6th, a building permit was pulled for a boathouse renovation at Lorraine Mercer's private residence. Kayla said, Contractor Mercer Logistics. She overlaid the invoice for the shelter lumber with the permit for the boathouse. The materials list was identical. They built her a boathouse with the wood, meant for the homeless shelter, I said. The rage was a cold, hard knot in my chest. They literally took the roof over our heads and put it over her jet ski. Kayla scraped the public donor reports next. She built a digital dossier that was breathtaking in its cruelty. On the left side of the screen, she placed the glossy PDF sent to donors. It showed a rendering of the bridge with solar lights, heating units, and a mobile medical van. The text claimed 100% of your donation goes to direct street impact. On the right side of the screen, she placed a photo I had taken yesterday. The bridge was a gray, dripping tomb. No lights, no heat, just wet concrete and a sign that said, no loitering. Dana printed the dossier. It was 2 inches thick. We are not going to court, Dana said, slamming the heavy stapler down on the final binding. Court takes 5 years. They have lawyers who cost more per hour than you made in a month. They would bury us in motions until you froze to death. She walked to the whiteboard and drew a big black circle around the names of the board members. We are going to the board, she said. These people are wealthy. They are respected. They sit on hospital boards and museum committees. They are allergic to public scandal. If this goes to trial, they just look like victims of a bad employee. But if we show them this inside their own boardroom, if we show them that they are liable, that they signed off on fraud. She tapped the marker against the wall. We only need to turn on the lights in the right room, Dana said, and watch the cockroaches scatter. I looked at the wall. It was a masterpiece of corruption. It was the story of why I was hungry. It was the story of why Miguel was cold. When is the meeting? I asked. 3 days, Dana said. Are you ready? I touched the keycard in my pocket. I thought about the blanket Victor had given me. I thought about the boathouse. I am ready, I said. Let's go turn on the lights. The silence did not last. I knew it wouldn't. You cannot walk into a secure sub-basement, trigger a digital tripwire with a reactivated keycard, and expect the spider at the center of the web not to feel the vibration. It started 3 days after I visited the archive. I was sitting on a park bench, using the free city Wi-Fi to upload photos of the empty bridge to a secure cloud server Dana had set up. My phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. I usually let those go to voicemail, but my gut told me this was not a bill collector. I swiped right. Ivy. The voice was smooth, cultured, and dripping with a synthetic concern that made my skin crawl. It was Preston Cole. Hello, Preston, I said. I kept my voice flat. I did not scream. I did not cry. I was a recording device. I was so relieved to hear your voice, he said, rushing the words slightly. We got a notification, a security glitch. Really, that showed your old credentials being used downtown. It made me realize we haven't checked in on you. How are you holding up? It is getting cold out there. I am fine, I said. Look, Ivy, Lorraine and I, we have been talking. We feel terrible about how things ended. The board was under pressure. Mistakes were made in the heat of the moment. We want to help. Help, I repeated. We want to offer you a settlement, Preston said, The word landed heavy and wet. For the misunderstanding, we can set you up in a nice motel tonight, the best Western on the highway, and a cash stipend, $20,000. Ivy, just to get you back on your feet. We can sign the papers there, a standard non-disclosure agreement, just to protect client privacy, and then the money is yours. $20,000. It was a fortune. It was an apartment. It was a car. It was heat. Clause 14.3, I said. There was a silence on the other end. A long, suffocating silence. I don't know what that is, Preston lied. He was a bad liar when he was off script. I think you do, I said. And I think you know that if I take one dime from you before the 30 days are up, I lose everything. Keep your motel room. Preston, I prefer the bridge. I hung up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of turning down a lifeboat while drowning. The direct approach had failed, so they switched to the social one. I found out about the prayer chain from Miguel. He had a burner smartphone he used to check the weather and local news. He shoved the screen in my face while we were huddled around the fire barrel that night. You are famous, Ivy, he muttered. It was a post from the First Grace Community Church, the largest congregation in Harbor Falls. Lorraine was a deacon there. Please join us in prayer for our fallen sister. Ivy Sanders. We have received word that she is battling severe mental health struggles and has turned against the mission of Harbor Light in her confusion. Pray that she finds clarity and releases her anger before she damages the work of the Lord. We pray against the spirit of greed that has taken hold of her heart. The spirit of greed, I whispered, reading the comments. So sad when they lose their way. Wrote a woman named Betsy, who I knew for a fact had 3 vacation homes. She was always a bit unstable. Wrote a former coworker who had once asked me to cover her shifts so she could go to a concert. It was a masterclass in narrative control. They were not calling me a liar. They were calling me crazy. They were framing my whistleblowing as a mental breakdown. Then came the Facebook photo. I had treated myself to a sandwich from a food truck 2 days ago, a cheap grilled cheese paid for with money I earned collecting cans. Someone had snapped a picture of me eating it, sitting on the curb, looking disheveled and hungry. The caption on the Harbor Falls gossip page read, "Pretty bold for someone who stole from the homeless to be buying lunch downtown. Guess the severance package was generous." The comments were a cesspool. I donated to that shelter and she is eating better than I am. Why isn't she in jail? Look at her eyes. She looks dangerous. I scrolled until my thumb hurt. They were stripping me of my humanity, layer by layer, so that when I finally spoke, no one would listen to a word I said. But I had a bigger problem than gossip. To satisfy the proxy clause, I needed documented, independent income. I could not just survive on cans. I needed a pay stub. I found a job at a place called the Night Owl, a 24-hour diner on the edge of the industrial district. It was the kind of place truck drivers went when they didn't want to be asked questions. The manager? A guy named Stan, with a grease-stained apron and a heart of gold, hired me to wash dishes on the graveyard shift. $12 an hour, under the table initially, but I insisted on being on the books. I need the tax record. Stan? I told him. Please. He looked at my desperation and put me on the payroll. For 5 nights. It was perfect. I stood in the back, up to my elbows in scalding gray water, scrubbing eggs off ceramic plates. The steam opened my pores and the heat soaked into my bones. It was the hardest work I had ever done, and I loved it because it was clean. On the 6th night, Stan called me into his office. He looked miserable. Ivy, I got calls, he said, refusing to look me in the eye. Calls, anonymous, 3 of them today, saying you are a liability, saying you have a history of violence, saying that if I keep you on, the health inspector might decide to pay us a surprise visit every day for a month. I untied my apron, feeling the familiar cold settle in my stomach. It is not true. Stan, you know it is not true. I run a razor-thin margin here. Kid, Stan said, wiping his forehead. I can't afford trouble. They said you are litigious, that you sue people. He was going to fire me. If he fired me, I lost my independent income status. The clock on the proxy clause would reset. I would have to start the 6 months all over again. I would die out there before then. I took a breath. I needed to play a card I didn't want to play. Stan, I said, keeping my voice steady. Do you know who Victor Hale is? Stan blinked. The charity guy. The big shot. Victor Hale is a silent partner in my legal situation. I lied. Well, half lied. If I get fired because of anonymous harassment, Mr. Hale is going to take a personal interest in why this establishment folded under pressure from his former board members. And Mr. Hale knows the health inspector, too. He probably plays golf with him. It was a bluff. A massive, terrifying bluff. But Stan paused. He looked at me, standing there in a wet shirt, and he saw something in my eyes that scared him more than the phone calls. Go back to the sink, he grunted. But if the inspector shows up, you are out the back door. I kept the job, but they were not done. The next morning, I went to Dana's office. I found her pacing in front of the evidence wall, holding a printout. Do not open your email, she said as soon as I walked in. Why? Because Lorraine Mercer is smarter than Preston, Dana said. She sent you a digital olive branch. Dana slapped the paper onto the desk. It was an email from Lorraine's official HFN address. Subject: Restorative Justice and Healing. Dear Ivy, my heart breaks to see the path this has taken. We are a family at Harbor Light, and families fight, but they also forgive. I want to invite you to a restorative justice dialogue. No lawyers, just us. We want to set up a monthly stipend for you, $500, to ensure you have housing security while you look for new work. We just want you safe. $500, I said. That is low. Read the attachment, Dana said, pointing to the second page. It is a draft agreement for the stipend. Look at paragraph 4, subsection B. I squinted at the tiny print. Recipient agrees that acceptance of these voluntary funds constitutes a waiver of any and all prior claims, rights, or standing regarding internal governance disputes, including but not limited to special bylaws or proxy triggers. It is a trap, I said. It is a beautifully constructed bear trap. Dana agreed. If you accepted $5 for a sandwich, you would be accepting voluntary funds. It would void your standing under Clause 14.3. They know about the proxy, Ivy. They dug up the bylaws. So they are trying to starve me out, I said. They know I can't take their money, so they are trying to make sure I can't make my own. Exactly, Dana said. She took a pushpin and stabbed the email into the wall. Right under a new header she had written in jagged red ink, coercion and bribery. Every time they try to buy you, they are admitting the debt. This goes in the file. But the worst blow didn't come from a lawyer or a boss. It came from my blood. I was taking out the trash behind the diner at 3 a.m. The alley was dark, smelling of rotting vegetables and rain. Ivy. I froze. I knew that voice. I hadn't heard it in 4 years. I turned around. My father, Douglas Sanders, was standing in the shadows of the loading dock. He looked older, grayer, wearing his maintenance uniform from the warehouse district. Dad, I asked, clutching the trash bag. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask if I was hungry. He looked angry. You need to stop this, he said, his voice rough. You need to stop embarrassing decent people. Decent people. I stepped closer, searching his face for any sign of the father who used to take me fishing. I am sleeping under a bridge. Dad, do you know that? Did you know I was homeless? You made your choices, he spat. You stole from that charity. Lorraine told me everything. Lorraine, I said, the name tasting like ash. You are talking to Lorraine. She called me, he said. She is worried about you. She says you are harassing them, blackmailing them. She is lying, Dad. Is she? He stepped into the light. He looked terrified. Because she also told me that the warehouse where I work, the one owned by her brother-in-law, is looking to downsize the maintenance crew. She said she could probably put in a good word for me, save my pension. But not if my daughter is trying to burn down her reputation. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Lorraine had dated my father briefly, 20 years ago, before she married money. She knew exactly which levers to pull. She was holding his pension hostage. "She is using you," I said, my voice trembling. "She is using you to get to me. I have 3 years until retirement." "Ivy," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I can't lose this job. I can't start over. Not like you. You are young. You can bounce back. Just take their deal. Go away. Stop ruining everything." He turned and walked away down the alley. He didn't look back. He chose his pension over his daughter. And the worst part was, I couldn't even blame him. Lorraine knew exactly how much everyone's soul cost. I sank down onto the milk crates by the back door and buried my face in my hands. This was the cost of the war. It wasn't just me freezing. It was everyone I touched getting burned. The next day, the rumors turned violent. Kayla found a thread on a local community safety forum. Someone had posted, heard from a reliable source that the disgruntled ex-employee, I.S., has been seen buying lighter fluid and talking about burning the whole place down. If you work at HFN, watch your back. "They are framing me as a terrorist," I told Dana, pacing her office. "They are going to get me arrested before the meeting. If I am in jail, I can't vote." "They are desperate," Dana said, her eyes cold behind her glasses. "And desperation makes people sloppy." She pulled out a fresh legal pad. "We are going to the police," she said. "Not to turn you in, to file a report." "A report." "We are filing a preemptive statement documenting a campaign of harassment and character assassination," Dana said. "We are going to attach the screenshots, the emails, and a sworn affidavit that you have no intent of violence. We are putting it on the record before something catches fire. If a trash can burns at Harbor Light tomorrow, the police will look at this file and see that Lorraine predicted it." Then she picked up the phone. "And about your job at the diner," she said. "I am sending a letter to the corporate owner of the Night Owl, and I am copying the city attorney. What are you going to say?" "I am going to inform them that their employee is a protected whistleblower under a federal proxy statute," Dana said, grinning that wolf grin again, "and that any retaliation, harassment, or termination without cause will result in a wrongful termination suit that will make their insurance premiums triple. Stan won't fire you, Ivy. He will be too scared to let you sneeze without offering you a tissue." I looked at the wall. It was covered in red and blue ink, a map of my pain, but it was also a map of their fear. "They are throwing everything at me," I said. "My dad, the church, the police." "That means we are close," Dana said. "You only bomb the bridge when the enemy is crossing it." I went back to the diner that night. Stan didn't look at me, but he didn't fire me. I washed the dishes. I scrubbed the grease. I thought about my father walking away in the alley. I wasn't just fighting for a blanket anymore. I was fighting for the right to exist without their permission. 30 days. I just had to hold on. Just hold on. The sound of electric drills shattered the freezing silence of the underpass. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The air was so cold it felt like inhaling crushed glass. I was walking back from my shift at the diner, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, when I saw the orange flashing lights of a city utility truck parked on the shoulder of the service road. I froze in the shadows of a concrete pillar, pulling my hood up. My first thought was that they were finally coming to sweep us out, to put up fences and force us into the woods. But the men in the reflective vests were not carrying batons. They were carrying ladders and zip ties. I watched as they mounted cheap, solar-powered garden lights, the kind you buy in a pack of 6 for $20 at a hardware store, onto the graffiti-covered columns. They were not wiring them into the city grid. They were just sticking them there with industrial adhesive. Then came the sign. One of the workers unfurled a flexible plastic banner and zip-tied it to the chain-link fence at the entrance of the encampment. It flapped aggressively in the wind. Pilot Project Bridge to Warmth Initiative, funded by Harbor Light. Outreach Network Status, Phase Y, 1. Installation, I stared at the sign, my breath hitching in my throat. Phase 1, Pilot Project. The words were a lie so audacious it made me dizzy. According to the financial records I had found in the sub-basement, the Bridge to Warmth initiative was fully funded and completed 3 years ago. They had already billed the donors for heated pods and high-grade lighting, but now, terrified by the sudden silence of the whistleblower they thought they had crushed. Lorraine and Preston were panicking. They were trying to backfill reality. They were rushing a cosmetic fix to create physical evidence that the program existed, using $50 worth of plastic lights to cover a $50,000 hole in the books. I crouched behind a dumpster as a white van pulled up behind the utility truck. The side of the van bore the Harbor Light logo, a lighthouse beaming hope into the dark. 4 people jumped out. I recognized them instantly. One was the new marketing director, a woman named Sarah, who I remembered as being ambitious and morally flexible. The others were junior staff, looking tired and cold. Then came the photographer. He had a camera with a lens the size of a telescope. "Okay, let's move," Sarah barked, clapping her gloved hands. "Lighting is terrible, but the flash will handle it. We need the care and action shots. Go find the subjects." I watched in horror as the staff moved into the sleeping camp. They didn't wake up the men who were coughing or the old veterans with missing limbs. They were looking for casting choices. They found a young woman named Maria, who had been sleeping near the fire barrel with her 2-year-old son. Maria was terrified, clutching her child as these people surrounded her. "It is okay, honey," Sarah cooed, her voice dripping with fake syrup. "We are just here to help. We want to give you a blanket. Is that okay?" Maria nodded, confused, eyes wide. One of the staff members produced a thick, plush thermal blanket, brand new, navy blue, with the Harbor Light logo embroidered in gold thread. It was beautiful. It was the kind of blanket that could actually save a life out here. They draped it over Maria and her son. The little boy instantly snuggled into the warmth, burying his face in the soft fabric. "Perfect," the photographer said. "Now, look up at the staff member. Smile like you are, relieved, like you finally feel safe." Maria managed a weak, confused smile. Flash, flash, flash. The strobe light illuminated the misery of the bridge like lightning strikes. "Great, got it," the photographer said, checking his screen. "Next setup. Get the old guy over there." Then, the scene played out that broke something inside me forever. As soon as the camera was lowered, Sarah stepped forward. I thought she was going to ask Maria if she needed food or a shelter bed. Instead, she reached out and gently but firmly pulled the blanket away from the toddler. "We will bring the real supplies later in the week," Sarah said, folding the expensive wool quickly. "These are just for the inventory photos. We have to log them back at the warehouse first." Maria looked at her empty hands. The little boy, ripped from the sudden warmth, let out a wail that echoed off the concrete. "Here," a junior staffer said, tossing a thin, crinkly foil emergency sheet, the kind that tears if you move too fast onto Maria's lap. "Use this for tonight." They moved on to the next person. They wrapped an old man in a coat, took a picture, and took the coat back. They handed a woman a bag of toiletries, snapped a shot, and put the bag back in the van. I did not scream. I did not run out and attack them. The rage that had been burning in me for 6 months suddenly cooled into something else. It hardened. It became a solid, diamond-hard clarity. This was not incompetence. This was not even just greed. This was a production. The bridge was not a place where people lived. To Lorraine and Preston, the bridge was a stage set. We were the extras. The cold was a special effect, and the blankets were props. I watched the van drive away, the taillights fading into the dark. The cheap solar lights flickered weakly, casting almost no light at all. I stood up. I walked over to Maria, who was trying to wrap the useless foil around her crying son. I took off the wool blanket Victor Hale had given me, the only thing that had kept me alive, and I wrapped it around the boy. "Keep it," I told her. "Hide it under your coat. Do not let them see it." Then I turned and walked away from the bridge. I was not going to sleep tonight. I had work to do. An hour later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a beat-up Honda Civic parked in the shadows of a 24-hour car wash. Next to me sat Ray Monroe. Ray was an independent journalist who ran a Substack called The Harbor Lens. She was hated by the city council and the police union because she refused to print press releases. She had been sniffing around the HFN finances for months, but she had hit a wall. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my thrift store clothes and my wind-burned face. "You are Ivy Sanders," she said. It was a statement, not a question. "The thief." "The scapegoat," I corrected. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the donor brochure from 3 years ago, the one I had stolen from the archive. I placed it on the dashboard. "Look at the photo," I said. "Look at the date." Ray turned on the overhead light. She studied the glossy image of the heated pods. "I remember this," Ray said. "They sent this out with the gala invites. The future of shelter." "Now look at this," I said. I held up my phone. I showed her the photo I had taken 2 hours ago from the bushes, the photo of Sarah taking the blanket back from the crying toddler. Ray stared at the screen. Her jaw tightened. "They staged it," she whispered. "Tonight?" "Tonight," I said. "They are rushing a fake pilot program because they know someone is looking. They are putting up dollar store lights and claiming it is the infrastructure they sold to donors 3 years ago." Ray looked at me, and the skepticism in her eyes vanished, replaced by the hunger of a reporter who just found the smoking gun. "Why are you giving this to me?" she asked. "You could sell this to the TV stations." "The TV stations run HFN's charity commercials," I said. "They won't touch it until it is safe. I need someone who will walk into the fire with me." "What do you need?" "I need you to be at the quarterly board meeting on Friday," I said. "Not outside, inside. You enter as community press. When I open the door, I need you to be ready to record what happens next." Ray nodded slowly. "I will be there. But Ivy, if you go in there, they will destroy you. You know that, right?" "They already destroyed me," I said, opening the car door. "Now I am just the ghost coming back to haunt the house." By 4 a.m, the war room at Dana's office was fully active. Dana was pacing. Miguel was sitting on the floor, warming up. Kayla was typing furiously on her laptop. "Counter-narrative," Dana said, pointing to the yellow section of the wall. "Lorraine is going to walk into that meeting with photos of the new lights and the happy clients wrapped in blankets. We need to blow that slide deck out of the water." "We have timestamps," Kayla said. "I can pull the metadata from the photos Ivy took tonight. It proves the pilot project was installed 3 years late." "Not enough," I said. I was standing by the window, looking out at the sleeping city. "We need to prove the history. We need to show that the bridge has been empty for the years they claimed it was full." I turned to Miguel. "You have a phone. You have photos of the camp from last winter, right? From the blizzard." Miguel nodded. "Yeah, we took pictures of the snowdrifts inside the tents. To show the city why we needed help." "Get them," I said. "Every photo, every video. Send them to Kayla. We are going to build a timeline. Every month they claim to be providing services. We are going to show the reality. For the next 3 hours, we assembled the truth. It was a gruesome collage. January 2023. Donor report, warming centers fully operational. Reality photo. Miguel sleeping in a wet cardboard box, surrounded by snow. November 2024. Donor report. Hot meal distribution daily. Reality photo. A group of men sharing a single loaf of moldy bread. Last night. Donor report. Phase 1 installation. Reality photo. Sarah pulling the blanket away from a crying child. "This is brutal," Dana said softly, looking at the slide deck Kayla had built. "It is not just fraud, it is torture." "We have one more thing to do," I said. "What?" "The nuclear option," I said. "If they shut down the meeting, if they throw me out before I can speak, if they bribe the other board members, we need a witness that can't be silenced." I looked at Dana. "I need to record a video." We drove back to the bridge just before dawn. The city was that deep, monochromatic gray that happens before sunrise. I stood on the service road. Behind me, the massive glass tower of the Harbor Falls network rose into the sky, its upper floors illuminated by golden light. It looked like a castle. In the foreground, the bridge was a dark, gaping mouth. Kayla held the camera. Dana held the boom mic. "Just tell the truth," Dana whispered. I took a breath. The cold air filled my lungs. I looked into the lens. "My name is Ivy Sanders," I said. My voice was steady. "For 5 years, I was a caseworker. I believed in the mission. 6 months ago, I was fired and accused of stealing $10,000 from the people sleeping 10 feet behind me." I pointed to the bridge. "I did not steal that money, but I know who did. I know because while they were drinking champagne in that tower," I pointed to the lit windows behind me, "I was sleeping on this concrete. I was freezing in the exact spot where they said they built a heating unit." I stepped closer to the camera. "They called me a thief to hide the fact that they are vampires. They didn't just take the money, they took the blankets, they took the dignity, and tonight I watched them take a warm coat off a 2-year-old boy just to get a photo for a brochure." I paused, letting the anger vibrate in my chest, controlling it, channeling it. "My name is Ivy Sanders, and I am not a thief. I am the evidence." "Cut," Kayla said. She wiped a tear from her cheek. "Save it to the cloud," I said. "Set it to auto-publish if I don't log in by noon on Friday." That night, the snow began to fall in earnest. I was alone under the bridge. I had given my good wool blanket to Maria, so I was wrapped in 2 layers of mismatched quilts I had scavenged from the donation bin. I sat on my bucket, watching the cheap solar lights flicker and die. They had lasted less than 24 hours. The batteries were garbage. The bridge to warmth was dark again. I reached into my pocket and touched the key card. Then I touched the plastic ID badge from my old life, the one I still kept in my trash bag. I looked up at the underside of the highway, at the soot-stained concrete that had been my roof, my prison, and my classroom. "I will never let them use this bridge to raise another dollar on a lie," I said out loud. My voice did not echo. The snow absorbed it. But the promise felt heavy, heavier than the concrete above me. I closed my eyes. I wasn't afraid of the meeting anymore. I wasn't afraid of Lorraine or Preston or their lawyers. I had survived the winter. I had survived the hunger. I had survived the shame. I was the winter now, and I was coming for them. The first shot of the war was not fired with a gun, but with a courier service envelope delivered at 9 o'clock in the morning. Dana Crowley did not send an email. Emails can be deleted. Emails can be trapped in spam filters or claimed to be lost in the server shuffle. Dana sent a physical notarized notice of intent to the corporate secretary of the Harbor Falls network, requiring a signature of receipt. I sat in her office, watching her track the delivery on her laptop. The little green truck icon moved through the streets of downtown until it stopped at the HFN tower. "Delivered," Dana said, leaning back in her squeaky chair. "Signed by the executive assistant. The clock has started." The letter was a thing of terrifying beauty. It formally invoked Clause 14.3 of the governance bylaws. It declared that at the upcoming quarterly meeting, the seat of the founder would not be empty, nor would it be filled by Victor Hale. It would be filled by his designated proxy, Ivy Sanders, who would hold full voting power on all agenda items related to Harbor Light, capital projects, and the bridge initiatives. The reaction was immediate and predictable. 2 hours later, Dana's phone rang. It was the corporate secretary, a woman whose voice usually sounded like she was smiling through clenched teeth. Today, she sounded frantic. She informed Dana that due to unforeseen maintenance issues in the main conference room, the board meeting was being moved. Instead of the downtown headquarters, it would be held at the Pines, a private country club 12 miles outside the city limits, a club that required a membership ID to even get past the gate. "Nice try," Dana said into the phone, her voice dripping with sweet poison. "But please refer to Bylaw 7.2. Any meeting involving a change in governance or proxy activation must be held at the registered headquarters of the Foundation. If the conference room is broken, we will meet in the lobby. If the lobby is full, we will meet in the parking lot. But we are meeting at the tower. She hung up before the secretary could argue. They want to hide, I said. They want to put us somewhere I don't belong. Somewhere they can have security stop me at the gate. They are scared, Dana said. Good. But we needed to make sure they couldn't claim the proxy was a hoax. We needed the ghost to show himself. That afternoon, Victor Hale made his move. I was not there. But Jasmine, my inside source at the coffee shop, texted me the details play by play. Victor walked into the HFN Tower lobby at 2 p.m. He was leaning heavily on a cane, playing up the image of the frail, retired old man. He walked right up to the reception desk, loudly enough for the donors sitting in the waiting area to hear. He asked if his parking validation would still work on Friday. When the receptionist hesitated, Victor smiled and said in a booming voice, I just want to make sure everything is in order. I am looking forward to seeing how my proxy performs at the next board meeting. It has been a long time since we had a proper vote, hasn't it? The silence in the lobby was absolute. By 3 o'clock, the rumor had spread to every cubicle in the building the old man was back, and he was sending the homeless girl to do his dirty work. Preston Cole tried to control the damage. At 4:30, a mass email went out to all staff. A sympathetic mid-level manager forwarded it to Dana within minutes. Subject: routine housekeeping session on Friday. Team. As we approach the end of the quarter, the board will be holding a standard administrative session on Friday morning to align our goals for the coming fiscal year. This is just a formality to approve the budget consolidations. Please disregard any rumors of dramatic changes. We are stronger than ever. Routine housekeeping, I read aloud, pacing in Dana's small office. He is trying to keep the staff calm so they don't start leaking files. He is trying to keep himself calm, Dana corrected. But look at this. She pulled up a digital invitation that Kayla had scraped from a donor's social media feed. The Harbor Falls Network cordially invites you to the Bridge to Warmth Impact Update reception. Friday, 1 p.m., the Grand Atrium. Join us for champagne and a celebration of our Phase 1 success. 1 o'clock? I said. The board meeting is at 10. Exactly, Dana said. Lorraine is betting everything on this meeting being a non-event. She has invited the biggest donors in the city to a party starting 1 hour after the vote. She plans to steamroll us, deny the proxy, close the meeting, and then go downstairs to drink champagne and show off photos of those fake solar lights. If she loses the vote, I said, realizing the stakes, that reception becomes a funeral. Then let's make sure she brings black clothes, Dana said. We held our final war council on Thursday night. We rented a cheap conference room at the public library because Dana's office was too small for the whole team. It was a strange assembly. There was me, the homeless social worker, Dana, the paralegal shark, Miguel, wearing his best flannel shirt, representing the street, Kayla, with her blue hair and 3 laptops, Ray Monroe, the journalist, sitting quietly in the corner with her notepad, and Mrs. Calloway. Mrs. Calloway was a retired city auditor Dana had recruited. She was 70 years old, wore a floral scarf, and had eyes that could spot a missing decimal point from across the room. She had spent the last 48 hours reviewing the financial documents I had stolen. It is clumsy, Mrs. Calloway said, tapping a spreadsheet with a manicured finger. They got arrogant. The transfers to Mercer Logistics are not even layered. They just categorized them as consulting fees and hoped nobody would check the vendor address. We have the gun, Dana said. Now we need the bullet. We spent 4 hours refining the presentation. It was a 14-slide deck. We stripped out all the fancy transitions. We wanted it cold, hard, and undeniable. Slide 1 to 4, the financial diversion map. Slide 5 to 8. The internal emails mocking the clients. Slide 9. The timeline of my firing versus the audit gaps. And then, Kayla said, we play the video. She turned her laptop around. It was a 2-minute montage she had edited. It started with the glossy donor brochure promising heated pods. Then it cut to a time-lapse of the bridge over 3 winters, showing nothing but snow and suffering. It ended with the clip of Sarah pulling the blanket away from the crying toddler, played in slow motion, side by side with the text from the mission statement, "Compassion in action." It was brutal. It made you want to look away, but you couldn't. "Who presents?" Ray asked from the corner. "Victor." Victor Hale was sitting at the far end of the table. He had been silent for most of the meeting, letting us work. Now, he looked up. "No," Victor said. "If I speak, the board will dismiss it. They will say, it is just an old man settling a score with Lorraine. They will say I am bitter about being pushed out. They will roll their eyes and wait for me to stop talking." He looked at me. "It has to be Ivy. I am not a board member," I said, feeling a sudden wave of nausea. "I am the person they fired. They will laugh at me." "They won't laugh," Victor said. "They will be terrified, because you are the ghost. You are the thing they tried to bury. When the victim walks into the room and starts citing bylaws, the bullies lose their power. You have to be the one to hold the knife. Ivy." I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. My hands were sweating. I tried to practice my opening line. "I am here to represent the founder," I started. It sounded weak, apologetic. "Louder," Dana said. "I am here to represent—" I stumbled. "Look, I know you think I stole the money, but—" "Stop," Miguel said. I turned to him. Miguel was leaning forward, his elbows on the table. "Ivy," he said, "do not apologize to them. You didn't steal anything. They stole from us. They stole my heat. They stole Maria's blanket. They stole your job." He stood up and walked over to me. "Tell them the truth," Miguel said. "They nailed your name to the bridge and called it accountability. Tell them that." I took a breath. I looked at the whiteboard. I imagined Preston's smug face. I imagined Lorraine's diamonds. "They nailed my name to the bridge," I whispered. Then I said it louder. "They nailed my name to the bridge and called it accountability. But today, I am bringing the bill." "That is it," Victor said softly. "That is the voice." The meeting broke up at midnight. I declined Dana's offer of her couch. I declined Victor's offer of a hotel room, reminding him that we had 12 hours left on the clock, and I wasn't going to void the proxy now. I walked the streets. I couldn't go back to the bridge. It felt too far away, and I needed to be close to the tower. I walked through the business district, looking at the skyscrapers that housed the banks and the law firms. The city was quiet, just the hum of streetlights and the occasional taxi. I walked the route from the underpass to the HFN tower. I traced it in my mind. It was a pilgrimage. 1.5 miles of pavement that separated the people who froze from the people who signed the checks. I thought about the last 6 months, the hunger that chewed at my stomach, the way people looked through me like I was glass. The nights I cried myself to sleep because I was so cold my bones ached. I wasn't just walking for me. I was walking for the guy who lost his toes to frostbite. I was walking for the woman who screamed at invisible demons because she couldn't get her meds. I was walking for the little boy who cried when they took his blanket. I found a 24-hour shelter near the river that had a working bathroom. I went in just as the sun was starting to turn the sky gray. I washed myself in the sink. I scrubbed my face until it was pink. I washed the dirt from under my fingernails. I combed the tangles out of my hair with water and cheap hand soap. I put on the clothes Dana had bought me from the thrift store. A pair of black slacks that were slightly too long, but clean. A white blouse that had been ironed. A gray blazer that smelled like lavender sachet. I looked in the cracked mirror. I didn't look like a homeless woman. I didn't look like a thief. I looked like a caseworker. I looked like the woman I used to be, but harder. The softness was gone from my eyes. I picked up the wool blanket Victor had given me, the one I had retrieved from Maria the night before, trading her 3 heavy quilts for it so I could have it for today. I folded it. I folded it with military precision, corner to corner, smoothing out the wrinkles. This wasn't just bedding. This was the flag of my army. It was the evidence. It was the symbol of everything they had taken and everything I was going to take back. I put the folded blanket into a canvas tote bag. I put the red binder with the proxy documents on top of it. I walked out of the shelter and into the dawn. The HFN tower stood in the distance, reflecting the rising sun. It looked like a fortress of gold. I checked my watch. It was 8 in the morning. I was hungry. I was tired. I was terrified. But as I walked toward the tower, my steps falling into a rhythm on the pavement, I realized something. I wasn't walking to a meeting. I was walking to a judgment, and I was the judge. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent. It was a silence that felt pressurized, like the cabin of a plane right before turbulence hits. I stood next to Victor Hale. He was leaning on his cane, staring straight ahead at the brushed steel doors. I stood a little behind him, clutching my canvas tote bag. Dana Crowley stood against the back wall, holding a sleek black portfolio case that contained our lethal injection of evidence. When the doors slid open, the air changed. Down on the street, the air smelled of exhaust and wet concrete. Up here, it smelled of filtered oxygen and expensive leather. We walked past the reception desk where the receptionist, a young woman who had once threatened to call the police on me for loitering in the lobby, turned pale as she saw us approach. She picked up her phone to warn them, but it was too late. We were already moving toward the double glass doors at the end of the hall. The Harbor Falls Network boardroom was a masterpiece of intimidation. It was a long, rectangular aquarium of glass and chrome, suspended high above the city. One entire wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the river district. And there it was, the bridge. From this height, the Interstate 5 overpass looked like a gray scar cutting through the city. It looked small, insignificant. You could not see the trash fires from up here. You could not see the rats. You could not see the people shivering in wet sleeping bags. From up here, poverty was just texture on the landscape. The room was already full. There were 12 people sitting around the massive black walnut table. They were the titans of Harbor Falls. There was Arthur Penhaligon, the board chair, a man whose family had owned half the timber land in Oregon. There was Marcus Thorne, the tech billionaire who wore hoodies to galas. There were corporate lawyers in three-piece suits and philanthropists in pearls. And at the head of the table sat Lorraine Mercer. To her right sat Preston Cole. They were laughing at something Preston had just said. The laughter died instantly as Victor pushed the glass door open. Every head turned. For a second, the only sound was the hum of the HVAC system. Then, the whispers started. I saw the recognition hit them like a wave. I saw a woman in a Chanel suit lean over to her neighbor and mouth the words, "Is that the thief I kept my chin up?" I was wearing my thrift store blouse and my clean gray blazer. I walked to the empty seat next to Victor, the one usually reserved for high-level guests. I did not sit. I stood behind the chair, my hands resting on the leather backrest. Lorraine recovered first. She was a professional. She smoothed her skirt and forced a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "Victor," she said, her voice dripping with a synthetic welcome. "We were not expecting you, and I see you have brought guests." She looked at me. Her eyes were cold, hard flint. "Thank you all for coming." Lorraine addressed the room, trying to regain control of the narrative immediately. "Before we begin the agenda, I want to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Ivy Sanders. It seems she has requested to observe our proceedings today. While this is highly irregular given her history with the organization, we want to be transparent. She was framing me as a spectator, a charity case, a disgraced former employee who had been allowed in out of pity. She is not here to observe, Lorraine," Victor said. His voice was not loud. It was deceptively mild, the voice of a grandfather discussing the weather, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. Victor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single cream-colored envelope. He slid it down the long, polished table. It spun slowly and stopped perfectly in front of Arthur Penhaligon, the board chair. "This is a formal notification of the activation of Clause 14.3 of the HFN governance bylaws," Victor said. "As of this morning, My voting rights as founder are no longer dormant, and I am not exercising them myself." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Ivy Sanders is my designated proxy on all matters involving Harbor Light, the bridge initiatives, and any alleged misconduct concerning those programs. She speaks with my voice. She votes with my shares." Arthur Penhaligon picked up the letter. He put on his reading glasses. The room was deathly silent. "Clause 14.3, Arthur read, his brow furrowing. He looked up at the corporate counsel, a sharp-faced lawyer named Diversey sitting at the end of the table. "Is this valid?" Diversey looked at the copy Dana had already placed in front of him. He looked sick. "It is a legacy clause, Arthur," the lawyer said quietly. "It was written into the original charter. It is valid. If Mr. Hale has designated a proxy who meets the independence criteria, her vote carries 51% weight on specific agenda items." 51%. The number hung in the air. I saw Preston Cole flinch. I saw the tech billionaire, Marcus, sit up straighter, looking at me with sudden interest. I was no longer a thief. I was the majority shareholder. "This is ridiculous," Lorraine snapped, her mask slipping. "She is a terminated employee. She was fired for theft. She cannot possibly meet the ethical standards to sit on this board." "The clause does not require ethical standards, Lorraine," Victor said, smiling faintly. "It requires independence. And since you made sure she has been unemployed and destitute for 6 months, she qualifies perfectly. You built her eligibility yourself." Arthur cleared his throat. He was a man who hated conflict. "Very well. The letter is entered into the record. Ms. Sanders is recognized as the founder's proxy. Let us proceed to the agenda." I sat down. The leather chair was soft. It felt like sinking into a cloud. It was a stark contrast to the bucket I had sat on 12 hours ago. Lorraine glared at me, then turned her attention to the papers in front of her. She was rushing. She wanted to get this over with before I could figure out how to use the weapon I had just been handed. "Item 1, Lorraine said, speaking quickly. "Program consolidation. As we discussed in the pre-meeting notes, the administrative costs for managing separate funds for the bridge outreach and the emergency shelter are becoming redundant. We propose a motion to simplify program reporting." She clicked a remote. A slide appeared on the massive screen at the end of the room. It showed a complex web of lines merging into one big blue circle labeled Community Hope Fund. "We will roll all bridge and shelter initiatives into this single fund," Lorraine explained. "This will reduce line item clutter and allow us more flexibility in resource allocation. It creates a streamlined, optimized, budget structure." I knew exactly what that meant. It meant burying the bodies. If they merged the funds, the specific line items for the heated pods and solar grids would disappear into a general ledger. The fraud would be erased, hidden inside a massive, vague bucket of money. "I move to approve the consolidation," Preston said quickly. "Seconded," said a woman in pearls who looked like she just wanted to get to the lunch reception. "All in favor?" Arthur asked. "Point of order," I said. My voice was not loud, but in that acoustic perfection, it sounded like a gunshot. Arthur looked at me. "Ms. Sanders, before we vote on consolidation," I said, keeping my hands folded on the table to hide the shaking, "I would like to request permission to present context relevant to the Trust's governance obligations and donor truthfulness. As the proxy, I believe this context is material to the vote." "We are on a tight schedule," Lorraine hissed. "The reception starts at 1. We do not have time for—" "The proxy requests the floor," Victor said, cutting her off. He did not look at Lorraine. He looked at Arthur. Arthur looked at the letter again. He looked at the lawyer, who gave a small, defeated nod. "The proxy has the floor," Arthur ruled. "Keep it brief. Ms. Sanders," I nodded to Dana. Dana stood up and plugged a small silver thumb drive into the media console on the wall. The screen flickered. The slide with the Community Hope Fund disappeared. "What you are about to see," I said, standing up again, "is a comparison It is a comparison between what HFN told the city and donors it was doing and what it actually did. I looked at Marcus Thorne, the billionaire. Mr. Thorne, I believe you donated $200,000 specifically for the winterization project 3 years ago. Is that correct? Marcus nodded slowly. I did. I was told it funded the heated sleeping pods. Watch the screen, I said. Kayla's video began to play. It started with the glossy PDF of the donor brochure. The image was crisp and beautiful. It showed the bridge, the very bridge visible out the window right now, transformed into a futuristic haven. There were silver pods. There were smiling staff members in orange vests. There were solar lights beaming warmth. The text on the screen read, Project completed, January 2023. Then, the screen split. On the right side, a new video appeared. It was grainy. Handheld footage taken by Miguel. The timestamp was January 2023. It showed the exact same section of the bridge. But there were no pods. There were no lights. There was only snow drifting against the graffiti-stained concrete. There was a man wrapping his feet in plastic bags. There was the sound of wind howling through the pillars. The contrast was nauseating. Then came the audio. The screen went black for a second, and a voice recording played. It was clear as a bell. It was Preston's voice. Voice of Preston Cole. Make sure we get the shots before the city sweeps the camp, and tell the staff to collect the props immediately. We can't have the homeless actually using the inventory. That gear is for the gala display. A gasp went around the room. Preston turned a shade of gray that matched the carpet. The video cut to the next scene. It was the time-lapse Kayla had built. It showed the bridge over 3 years. Seasons changed. Snow came and went, rain fell, but the structure never changed. The upgrades never appeared. The only thing that changed was the graffiti and the faces of the people huddled in the dirt. And then, the final image. It was a photo taken by Ray Monroe a year ago. Long before we met, it was a photo of me. I was asleep under the bridge. I was curled in a fetal position against Pillar 4. I was dirty. My hair was matted, and I was wrapped in a thin blue fleece blanket. The camera zoomed in on the blanket. The HFN logo was clearly visible. Next to my sleeping form, text from the annual report appeared. Bridge to warmth, 100% impact achieved. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of people who realized they were standing on a trap door. I looked around the table. I made eye contact with every single person. My name is Ivy Sanders, I said. 6 months ago, I was the case manager for this program. I was fired for allegedly stealing $10,000 from the emergency fund. I paused. I did not steal that money, but I know where it went. It went to vendors who never delivered a single heated pod. It went to consultants who never set foot on the street. I pointed out the window at the gray scar of the bridge. You used my name as the plug for the hole in your ledger. You blamed me for the missing money so you could close the audit. And then, you let me sleep under the very bridge you claimed you had fixed. I looked at Lorraine. She was staring at the table, her knuckles white as she gripped her pen. I laid on that concrete, I said, my voice trembling with a rage I finally let them see. I froze on that concrete while reading press releases on my phone about how successful the program was. I listened to donors praise the Sanders Initiative, while I begged for change to buy a cup of coffee. I turned to Arthur. If you vote to consolidate these funds today, you are not streamlining the budget. You are burying the evidence of a crime. You are ratifying 3 years of fraud. Lorraine stood up abruptly. This is emotional blackmail, she said, her voice shrill. This is a performance. Where is the proof? These are just doctored videos and disgruntled rantings. The proof is in the invoices, a new voice said. Mrs. Calloway stepped forward from the back of the room. She looked like a kindly grandmother, but she placed a stack of documents on the table with the force of a gavel. My name is Helen Calloway, she said. I am a retired city auditor. I have reviewed the internal records provided by the founder's proxy. She opened a folder. HFN's filings to the city list the bridge upgrades as capital assets, fully depreciated over 3 years. That means you told the IRS and the city council that these pods exist. If they do not exist, and you vote to merge the funds today without correcting the record, every single board member who votes yes becomes personally liable for tax fraud and filing false instruments. The word liable hit the room like a bomb. The wealthy people at the table suddenly looked very uncomfortable. They looked at their lawyers. Marcus Thorne, the tech billionaire, leaned forward. He picked up the folder. Mrs. Calloway had put down. He flipped through it. I have a question, Marcus said. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Lorraine. Go ahead, Marcus, Lorraine said, her voice tight. I am looking at a specific invoice here, Marcus said. It is invoice number 4029, dated last November. It is for $250,000, payable to Bridge Logistics LLC for strategic site management. He looked up. I ran a quick search on my phone just now. Bridge Logistics LLC is a Delaware shell company. Its registered mailing address is a P.O. box in a strip mall in Reno, Nevada. He slid the paper toward Preston. Preston, Marcus said, his voice dangerous. Why does the registered agent for Bridge Logistics share the same last name and home address as your brother? The air left the room. Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Lorraine. Lorraine looked at the window. I am not familiar with that specific vendor. Preston stammered. There are many logistical partners. I would have to check the files. You signed the check. Preston, I said. Your signature is on the digital copy. Marcus Thorne stood up. He was a man who built empires on data. He knew when he was being played. You took my money, Marcus said, his voice low and furious. You took $200,000 from my family foundation, told me it was for heating pods, and you gave it to your brother. It is complex, Lorraine tried to interject. The logistical challenges of the site required— Shut up, Lorraine, Arthur Penhaligon said. The board chair took off his glasses. He looked at the view of the bridge. He looked at the video freeze frame of me sleeping in the dirt. Then he looked at the panicked faces of his CEO and board president. We are not voting on consolidation, Arthur said. We are voting on an audit. The room turned. I could feel the shift in gravity. The board members were no longer a unified wall of wealth protecting their own. They were rats on a sinking ship, and they had just realized that Lorraine and Preston were the leak. I looked at Victor. He gave me a single, slow nod. I stood there, my hand resting on the leather chair, looking at the people who had stolen my life. They were not giants. They were just thieves in expensive suits, and I had just turned on the lights. Arthur Penhaligon looked like a man who had just realized the luxury liner he was captaining had hit an iceberg an hour ago, and he was only now feeling the water rise around his ankles. He took off his gold-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a nervous tic that betrayed the panic rising behind his eyes. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the server drives in the corner and the ragged breathing of Preston Cole. This is a great deal of information to digest, Arthur said, his voice wavering slightly. He looked at the clock on the wall. The reception downstairs is scheduled to begin in 45 minutes. I suggest we take a short recess, perhaps 15 minutes to review the documents Mrs. Calloway has presented and allow cooler heads to prevail. He reached for his gavel, desperate for a moment of air, a moment to pull Lorraine aside and ask her how in God's name she had let this happen. No, Arthur, Victor Hale said. Victor did not raise his voice. He did not slam his hand on the table. He simply spoke with the absolute granite weight of a man whose name was on the building. The people under that bridge do not get recesses from the cold, Victor said, looking Arthur dead in the eye. They do not get 15 minutes to review their situation. They freeze in real time. We vote now. Arthur's hand froze halfway to the gavel. He looked at Victor, then at the terrifying stack of evidence on the table, and finally at me. He sat back in his chair, defeated. Very well, Arthur said tightly. The chair recognizes the proxy. I stood up. My legs felt solid now. The shaking had stopped. I was no longer the girl shivering under a blanket. I was the mechanism of correction. I looked down at the notes I had prepared with Dana and Mrs. Calloway, but I found I did not need them. The words were burned into my mind. "I propose a motion," I said, my voice ringing clear against the glass walls. "Motion 1? I move for the immediate authorization of an independent forensic audit of all Harbor Falls network programs related to Harbor Light, the Bridge to Warmth initiative, and any capital projects associated with street outreach for the past 5 fiscal years." I paused, letting the legal weight of the words settle. "This audit must be conducted by a Tier 1 accounting firm located out of state, with no prior contractual relationship to HFN or any of its current board members. The selection of the firm will be overseen by the founder's office, not the current executive committee." Preston Cole made a noise in his throat, like a dying engine, but I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the board. "Furthermore," I continued, "during the pendency of this audit, I move that all discretionary spending and new program branding related to bridge initiatives be frozen immediately. No new brochures, no donor pitches, no pilot projects meant to obscure past misreporting. The narrative stops today." The room was silent for a heartbeat. Then, Robert, the cautious banker who had earlier questioned the shell company invoice, cleared his throat. He was doing the math in his head. He knew that if the state regulators found this mess before the board did, he would be uninsurable. "I second the motion," Robert said, his voice flat and businesslike. "If there are irregularities, it is far better for donor exposure if we self-initiate the investigation than if the Attorney General does it for us. We need to get ahead of the blast radius." "We have a motion and a second," Arthur said, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "All in favor?" Robert raised his hand instantly. Marcus Thorne, the billionaire, raised his hand without looking away from the window. 2 other members, a hospital administrator, and a retired judge, raised their hands, smelling the smoke of a legal fire they wanted no part of. The proxy votes. "Yes," I said, raising my hand. "With the founder's 51% weight, the motion carries." I heard the snap of Dana's pen against her notebook. It sounded like a gunshot. The first wall had fallen. I did not sit down. "Motion 2, I said. Lorraine Mercer's head snapped up. Her face was a mask of fury and terror, her makeup unable to hide the flush of panic rising up her neck. I move that Lorraine Mercer and Preston Cole be temporarily suspended from any role in financial authorization, vendor selection, or public communications concerning HFN's direct services programs, pending the outcome of the forensic audit. I said. I looked directly at Preston. This suspension includes the immediate disabling of their company credit cards, expense accounts, and digital approval codes. They are to be removed from the chain of custody for all financial records effective this minute. "This is outrageous!" Lorraine exploded. She stood up so fast her heavy leather chair slammed into the glass wall behind her. "You cannot do this. This is a personal vendetta. You are bitter because you were fired for incompetence, and now you are using a senile old man to destroy my reputation." She pointed a manicured finger at me, her hand shaking with rage. "You are a thief, Ivy Sanders. You are a vindictive, small-minded girl who lived in the gutter because she belonged there. You are trying to punish me for doing what was necessary to keep this organization solvent." The room recoiled at her venom. It was ugly. It was the sound of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. I waited for her to stop shouting. I waited until her breath was coming in ragged gasps. I did not yell back. I let the silence stretch until her outburst hung in the air like a bad smell. "If I wanted revenge, Lorraine," I said quietly, "I would be on the 6 o'clock news tonight. I would be showing those videos to a reporter outside the building right now. I would be burning this entire organization to the ground." I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the polished table. "I am here instead of there because I do not want to destroy the shelter. I want to save it. I want an honest ledger and I want warm beds. That is not revenge. That is fiduciary duty." Dana Crowley stepped away from the wall. She walked silently to the head of the table and slid a thick, sealed folder toward Arthur. "Mr. Chairman," Dana said, her voice sharp and professional. "This folder contains sworn affidavits from 25 shelter clients, 7 former staff members, and 2 former accountants regarding the diversion of funds and the falsification of intake records." She tapped the folder with her index finger. "Beneath those affidavits is a pre-drafted notification to the state charity regulator and the district attorney's fraud division. My client has instructed me to file this notification at 5 o'clock this afternoon if the board fails to take corrective action regarding the current leadership. The choice of whether this remains an internal governance matter or becomes a criminal investigation is entirely yours." Arthur stared at the folder as if it contained anthrax. Marcus Thorne finally turned away from the window. He looked at the empty bridge below. Then he looked at Lorraine. His face was unreadable, which made it terrifying. "I gave you $200,000, Marcus said. His voice was soft, but it carried across the room. "I remember the lunch we had. Lorraine, you showed me renderings. You told me about the solar grids. You stood next to me and told me that my money would keep people from freezing." He gestured toward the glass. "I am looking at the bridge. It is bare concrete. You lied to me." "Marcus, please, it was a capital allocation strategy," Lorraine began, her voice shrill. "If this audit is blocked," Marcus cut her off, "or if these 2 remain in control of the checkbook for 1 more hour, I will pull every cent of my support. I will demand a refund of my past donations, and I will publicly advise every other tech founder in this city to blacklist this foundation." The threat hung in the air. HFN survived on tech money. Marcus Thorne was the king of that world. If he walked, the foundation died. Arthur Penhaligon wiped sweat from his forehead. He knew the math. He could save his friends, or he could save the institution. He could not do both. "We have a motion to suspend," Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. "Is there a second?" "Second," Marcus said instantly. "All in favor." Marcus raised his hand. Robert the banker raised his hand. The retired judge raised her hand. One by one, the hands went up around the table. Even the people who owed Lorraine favors realized that the ship was going down, and they needed to get to the lifeboats. "The proxy votes?" "Yes," I said. "Motion carries." Lorraine slumped back into her chair. She looked small suddenly. The power that she wore like a coat had been stripped away, leaving only a frightened woman who had spent too much money on a boathouse. But I wasn't done. "Motion 3, I said. This was the one that mattered. This was the one for Miguel, for Maria, for the boy who lost his blanket. I move for the immediate adoption of a provisional open bed policy for all HFN-funded facilities. I said, this policy dictates that no client may be turned away from shelter intake when there is any funded bed, mat, or overflow space physically empty. The practice of artificial capacity limits to save on laundry or staffing costs ends today. I looked at the corporate secretary, making sure she was typing every word. Furthermore, all capacity denials must be documented with a transparent log, time-stamped and signed by the shift supervisor, explaining exactly why space was unavailable. These logs will be reviewed weekly by the Oversight Committee. I took a breath, and I add a governance clause. Any future capital program named after a physical location like the Bridge to Warmth must undergo on-site verification by at least one independent board member. There must be documented, time-stamped photographic evidence of the completed installation before the project can be advertised to donors or included in the annual report. No more ghost projects. The room was quiet. This wasn't just a punishment. It was a restructuring. It was a change in the DNA of the organization. Arthur looked at the other board members. He saw exhaustion. He saw fear. But he also saw resignation. They knew they had no moral ground left to stand on. Second, Arthur asked weakly. Second, the hospital administrator said. It is the right thing to do. All in favor. Every hand in the room went up, even the ones who had hesitated before. It was undeniable. Motion carries, Arthur said. He let out a long breath and set the gavel down gently, as if he didn't have the strength to bang it. The double doors at the back of the room opened. 3 men in blue button-down shirts walked in. They were from the IT department. They looked nervous, holding plastic bins. Arthur nodded to them. "Proceed." The lead IT technician walked over to Preston Cole. "Mr. Cole," he said softly, "I need your laptop, your company phone, and your security badge. Please." Preston stared at him. His hands were shaking as he unclipped his badge from his lapel. He placed it in the bin. It made a small plastic clatter. He handed over his phone. Then he closed his laptop and pushed it across the table. The technician moved to Lorraine. Lorraine did not move. She stared straight ahead, her eyes fixed on the far wall. "Ms. Mercer," the technician said. She didn't respond. "Lorraine," Arthur said gently, "give him the badge." Slowly, painfully, she reached into her purse. She pulled out the gold-trimmed access card that gave her entry to the executive elevator, the card that opened the doors to the gala, the card that defined who she was in this city. She dropped it into the plastic bin. The technician took her phone and her tablet. He walked out of the room, carrying the digital keys to the kingdom in a cheap plastic tub. Victor Hale sat back in his chair. He let out a long, slow sigh. He looked at me, and for the first time, his eyes were not sharp or calculating. They were just tired and proud. I stood at the head of the table. I was wearing a $10 blouse and a thrift store blazer. My shoes were scuffed from walking the streets all night. I had frostbite scars on my fingers. But as I looked around the glass room, at the billionaires and the lawyers, and the ruin of the people who had tried to erase me, I realized something. I was the only one in the room who wasn't afraid. I looked out the window at the bridge. It was still gray. It was still cold. But tonight, the lights would be real. "The meeting is adjourned," I said, and for the first time in the history of the Harbor Falls network. Nobody argued with the homeless girl. The adjournment of the meeting did not sound like a gavel banging. It sounded like the collective exhale of 12 people who realized they had narrowly avoided a federal indictment. We walked out of the glass doors and into the hallway. The adrenaline that had sustained me for the last hour began to drain away, leaving me feeling lightheaded and hollow. My knees felt weak, but I kept my spine straight. I had one more walk to make. Ray Monroe was waiting for us by the elevator bank. She was leaning against the wall, her thumb scrolling on her phone, a digital recorder clearly visible in her other hand. Arthur had invited her up as a community observer in a desperate attempt to prove they had nothing to hide. Now, she was the witness to their collapse. Lorraine Mercer was the first one out. She was walking fast, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. She saw Ray and immediately tried to deploy the smile that had charmed donors for a decade, but her face was too tight. It looked like a mask that was cracking. "Ms. Mercer," Ray said, stepping forward. "Care to comment on the motion to suspend?" Lorraine stopped. She hissed the words, low and venomous. "This is a tragic case of an unstable former employee manipulating an elderly man. We will be filing a defamation suit as soon as—" She cut herself off. She had seen Victor Hale standing directly behind me. He was not leaning on his cane. He was standing with his arms folded, staring at her with an expression of profound disappointment. Lorraine flinched. She actually physically recoiled. She looked from Victor to me, and for the first time, she realized that the unstable employee was now her boss. She clamped her mouth shut, pushed past Ray, and headed for the fire stairs, unwilling to wait for the elevator with us. Preston Cole was next. He was sweating through his shirt. He saw the journalist and tried to salvage the wreckage of his career in real time. "We welcome transparency," Preston stammered, smoothing his tie. "This audit will prove that our intentions were always—" He reached out and tapped his access card against the elevator call panel. Beep! A harsh, flat denial tone echoed in the hallway. The small light on the panel flashed angry red. The IT department had been efficient. His codes were already dead. Preston tapped it again. Beep! He looked at the card. He looked at the elevator. Then he looked at Ray. who was holding the recorder inches from his face, capturing the sound of a man who had just been locked out of his own kingdom. "I think you need to take the stairs, Preston," I said quietly. He looked at me with pure hatred, but he said nothing. He turned and ran for the stairwell door, chasing Lorraine into the dark. Back inside the boardroom, the corporate secretary was printing the minutes. The printer whirred in the silence. She handed me a pen and the fresh, warm sheet of paper. Motion to audit passed. Motion to suspend executive leadership passed. Motion for open bed policy passed. Moved by I, Sanders, proxy. I looked at my name. It was printed in bold black ink. It was official. It was legal history. I signed the bottom of the page. My hand did not shake. I pressed the pen down hard, carving my signature into the paper. Ivy Sanders. Victor walked over to me. He watched me cap the pen. "I watched you hand out blankets on that bridge when your own apartment had no heat," Victor said softly. "I watched you give away your last pair of gloves. I wondered if you were foolish or if you were just good." He looked out the window at the gray concrete of the overpass below. "Today, you took the blankets back from the thieves," he said. "I have seen enough." He reached into his jacket pocket. I thought he was going to hand me a check. I thought he was going to offer me money. Instead, he handed me a single sheet of heavy stationery. It was a directive, signed by him as founder 5 minutes ago. Establishment of the Client and Street Outreach Oversight Council. Chairwoman Ivy Sanders. "This is a voting seat," Victor said. "The bylaws require a monitoring committee for the new policy. You are not just the proxy anymore. Ivy, you are the oversight. You have the authority to walk into any facility, check any ledger, and count any bed. You are the guard dog." I took the paper. It felt heavier than the check would have. "Thank you," I whispered. "Do not thank me," Victor said, putting his hat on. "Go do the work. The sun is going down." We left the tower together. We did not go to a celebratory lunch. We did not go to a bar to toast our victory. We walked out of the gold revolving doors and turned north, heading straight back to the underpass. The walk felt different this time. The pavement was the same. The cold wind was the same. But the city felt smaller. The skyscrapers didn't loom over me anymore. I knew the secrets inside them now. When we rounded the corner to the bridge, I saw them. Dana was there, still holding her briefcase. Miguel was standing by the fire barrel. Kayla was sitting on a milk crate. And behind them, a small white box truck was backing up onto the service road. It was not a Harbor Light truck. It belonged to an independent camping supply vendor. The driver hopped out and unlatched the back. "Order for Hale," the driver asked. "That is us," Victor said. He turned to me. "I paid for this from my personal accounts. If we used foundation money, the lawyers would freeze the assets during the audit. These are clean." I looked inside the truck. It was full. There were 50 heavy-duty canvas cots, the kind that lift you 6 inches off the freezing ground. There were stacks of industrial tarps, and there were boxes, dozens of boxes of heavy, 0-degree wool blankets. "All right," I said, my voice cracking just a little. "Let's get to work." For the next 2 hours, I did not feel the cold. I was moving too fast. We set up a perimeter. Miguel organized the men to unload the cots. We arranged them in neat military rows between the concrete pillars, spacing them out so everyone had dignity and room. Dana set up a folding table near the entrance. She placed a clipboard on it. "Intake," Dana said, grinning. "Name and needs, no social security numbers, no background checks. Just, are you cold? And do you want a bed?" I took a laminated sign I had printed at the library the night before. I zip-tied it to the central pillar, right over the spot where the fake Bridge to Warmth sign had been. Notice: open bed policy in effect. No funded bed stays empty while someone sleeps on concrete. Monitoring lead I, Sanders. As the sun began to dip behind the skyline, turning the gray bridge into a cavern of shadows, the people started to come back. They came cautiously at first. They were used to being chased away. They were used to promises that turned into photo ops. But then they saw the cots. They saw the blankets that were not being taken away. Maria came back with her toddler. She looked at me, terrified, holding the wool blanket I had given her the night before hidden under her coat. "It is okay," I told her, pointing to a cot near the fire barrel where it was warmest. "You don't have to hide it. Maria, it is yours, and that cot is yours too." She sat down on the canvas cot. She touched the fabric. She started to cry, silently, rocking her son back and forth. Miguel lay down on the cot next to her. He stretched out his legs, groaning as his back settled onto a surface that wasn't hard earth. "Man," Miguel said, looking up at the underside of the highway, "I am going to have to get used to not feeling rocks in my kidneys. It feels weird." A few people chuckled. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a quiet, rusty sound. The sound of tension leaving a body that has been tense for years. By 8 in the evening, every cot was full. 50 people were off the ground. The wind was still blowing. But the tarps we had hung blocked the worst of it. It wasn't a palace. It was still a bridge. But it was a bridge with rules. And the rules were finally on our side. Dana came over to me. She had a camera in her hand. "Go stand over there," she said, pointing to the edge of the service road. "I don't want a photo," I said. "I am not Lorraine." "It is not for a brochure," Dana said. "It is for the file, proof of life." I walked over to the edge of the light. I was wearing my thrift store blouse and the coat Dana had lent me. I had a pen in my hand and the clipboard tucked under my arm. Dana snapped the photo. I knew what it would look like. The bridge arching overhead, dark and massive, the rows of cots, and in the distance, the HFN tower, lit up like a Christmas tree, where the cleaners were currently emptying the trash cans of the men we had just fired. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I was the monitoring lead. I walked the perimeter. I checked the tarps. I tucked a blanket around an old man who was shivering in his sleep. I counted heads to make sure the numbers on my clipboard matched the bodies on the cots. Around 3 in the morning, when the city was dead quiet, I sat down at a battered folding table someone had dragged from a dumpster. I turned on a small battery-powered lantern. I opened the red binder Victor had given me. I started writing the new protocols for the Oversight Council. Rule 1, no closed doors. Rule 2, no photos of clients without written consent. Rule 3, if the budget is cut, the executive salaries are cut first. I wrote until my hand cramped. Then, I stopped. I looked at the foot of the empty cot next to my table, the one I had reserved for any late arrivals. Folded neatly at the bottom was the blanket, the one Victor had put on me that first night, the navy wool with the satin trim. I reached out and ran my hand over the rough weave. It was cold to the touch, but it held the memory of warmth. I looked up at the dark underbelly of the overpass. I listened to the breathing of 50 people who were sleeping safely because I had refused to disappear. "If they ever try to take this from you again," I whispered into the freezing air, my breath clouding in the lantern light. I touched the ID badge in my pocket. "They won't be facing a homeless thief. They will be facing the woman who learned to vote from the bridge." I picked up my pen, I turned the page, and I went back to work. Thank you so much for listening to this story. And please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Ivy's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.